Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Shit Loretta Knows. I am sorry that I am 3 minutes late, but my Wi-Fi has been a bit dodgy and Facebook decided, I put the thing in for the live and then it decided to stop working, so I had to start all over again. Anyway, here we are. Today we're talking about how your signs and symptoms are part of your innate genius. Now, you might say, part of your innate genius. How can signs and symptoms be part of our innate genius? Well, I'm going to tell you how it is or why it is that way. So first of all, when people get a diagnosis, especially when it's something that's fairly serious, or even if it's, when I say fairly serious, right? I mean, it can be anything from recurrent infections to maybe an autoimmune disorder, which is quite serious, or maybe it's a dread disease, which is really serious. That's why they call them dread diseases. We tend to freak out, and it always amazes me how people go to doctors and specialists. So that doesn't amaze me. I totally get that, but never think of, for example, going to see a therapist or going to talk about how this makes them feel. Because quite frankly, if you've never had a dread disease or you've never had an autoimmune disorder, if you've never had a serious diagnosis conferred on you, how do you know how to handle that? So anyway, that's just an aside. But basically, there's a lot of anxiety very often. There's a lot of overwhelm. And there's a lot of like, why has this happened? And I don't understand why this is happening. And like, and how can I fix it? The emphasis is all on how can I fix it? And we don't take the time to actually ask ourselves, what does it mean? What does it mean? Does it mean anything? So that's what I want to talk to you about today. So you know that we're all creating our reality all the time, okay? And so even disease is part of our creation. Now, this can be very controversial because it sounds like you purposefully created something that you didn't want. But you know, a lot of times in your life, you create shit you don't want. So why would disease be any different? You know, you don't necessarily create like a hectic financial situation consciously or voluntarily. You don't create a business that's going to go on insolvent voluntarily, but you are part of the creation of that. Because one of the fundamental premises of the creative orientation is that we are all creators. We all have a heart and there's all things that we would love to create. And we are all creating all the time. Some of us consciously and some of us unconsciously. So disease is part of the unconscious creation of symptoms. And so we have these two streams of consciousness. You have your ego reality, which is limited. That's where all your fears, your beliefs, your thoughts, and your feelings reside. And then you have your limitless spirit, which is limitless, right? So you could call that your heart or your soul choices. And your ego is constantly creating from a place of fear. It's trying to keep you safe. So of course, when you have signs and symptoms, when things start going wrong in your body or in your emotional health or in your mental health, you start freaking out, right? Because it's fear. It induces fear. Like, what if I don't get better? What if this is more serious? What if they can't find out what's wrong with me? This was the mainstay of my practice when I was a homeopath, especially when I was first in practice. I was like blown away by how many people came to see me because they had been to conventional medicine and they'd been to specialists and they'd had all the tests, for example. So either the tests were negative, but they still felt shit. So they were even more freaked out because they couldn't get a diagnosis. They were like, if someone could just tell me what this is. I'm like, yeah, well, if I told you what this is, how's this going to help you get any better? But, you know, that's how the mind works. So they want to know what it is. They want a diagnosis. They used to come and see me because they didn't have a diagnosis, or they had a diagnosis. It was something like you have an autoimmune disorder. The only thing you can do is take immunosuppressive drugs. They maybe didn't want to take the immunosuppressive drugs, or they took the immunosuppressive drugs, had such side effects that they needed to come off, and then were looking for something else, right? But it's all about fixing it. It's very, very fear-based. And that is when we are looking at disease from the viewpoint of our ego reality. It's going to conjure up the fear of what have I got? Why did I get it? Why is it here? And how the living fuck am I going to get rid of it? That's actually the main thing, all right? And so I've got to get rid of it at all costs, which means we never take any time to stop and just ask ourselves, what is this trying to tell me? Is there meaning in this? What is the meaning in this? Could there be a meaning in this, right? Okay, so I'm here to tell you that if we take the time, we can actually find the meaning in our signs and symptoms. And the truth is that we create this unconsciously, and it's part of our genius. It's not part of our moron that's doing this, right? So when we are living according to our spirit is accessing our creativity and our joy. Our ego is operating from fear and it's trying to keep us safe. Our spirit wants to express itself in the world. It wants us to create beautiful things in the world, right? It wants us to create joyfully. So we all have a fundamental choice, all humans. And I am getting to the signs and symptoms and the genius, I promise, right? So we all have, all of us have a thing that we would all love in common. We all want freedom. We all want the freedom to be who we are and to be loved because of it. The problem is that every single human has a unique set of values, has a unique set of conditions towards which they prioritize energy, time, money, effort, energy. Okay, so some people have a high value on work, some people have a high value on family, some people have a high value on their spiritual connection, some people have a high value on social. Most of us have values on different things, right? And they're arranged in a hierarchy. So when you're born and you're tiny, your parents each have, I've got a funny piece of hair here that's fallen out of my thingy. Your parents each have their own unique set of values. And when people support our values, then we open up and we warm up to them. And when people challenge our values, in other words, when they have things in common with us, we open up to them and then we become friends with them. When they have things not in common with us, when we see ourselves as different, then we shut down and we reject them. So when we're tiny, our parents each have a value system. And we learn that when we support the value systems of our parents, they are warm and open and loving. And when we challenge the value systems of our parents, they are more cold and more withdrawing and slightly more rejecting. And here's the thing, if you get rejected as a baby, you die because you can't live on your own. So it engenders a very, very real fear. And so we learn to please authority figures. We learn to get approval by doing what the authority figures want. Some of us who become the black sheep, I wasn't one of them, we get the attention of the authority figures by doing the opposite, right? But both of those are responses from our ego in an attempt to try and keep us as safe as possible, all right? Also, in the first 3 years of our lives, when we have unmet needs or we're exposed to trauma, we develop beliefs about ourselves. We develop a belief about ourselves, develop a belief about other people, or we develop beliefs about the world. And that becomes our concept of reality. And those limiting beliefs, those foundational limiting beliefs, essentially force us to develop a coping strategy to cover them up. So if your limiting belief is I'm unworthy, not worthy of being loved by my parents, ergo I will be rejected, and which means I will die, then you might become an incredibly good baby. You might become very sensitive and very vigilant. You're always on the lookout to make sure that you are aware when other people are unhappy. You may learn that pleasing others is the reason for being, and that everyone else's happiness is more important than yours. And when you employ that coping strategy, of course, it pleases the adults in your environment. And as a consequence of that, you get validation for that, which means that you keep on doing that. You start calling that a good thing. But it essentially keeps you trapped in living according to the dictates of your ego. Almost said your evil. It's not evil. Your ego is not evil. Your ego, okay? And you are limited then by this map of reality that you have formed from the world. So one of my teachers, Dr. John DeMartini, he said that that the universe is a grand organized design, all right? That is, an acronym is God, and that essentially there's order in the universe. You either believe that it's ordered or it's disordered. So I choose to believe that it's ordered. And in this ordered universe, there are 4 feedback mechanisms to show you whether you are in alignment with who you really are, truly who you are, your truth, or whether you are out of alignment. In other words, where are you living to please others, and where are you living to be true to who you really are? And these 4 feedback mechanisms, the first one is your physiology, your body, all right? The first one is your body and your emotions, because that's where you experience your emotions, in your physical body. So when your physical body is showing signs and symptoms, it's an indicator that you are out of alignment with who you really are. If your physiology isn't enough to wake you up, then your psychology will wake you up. So now the way that you start thinking and seeing the world starts getting affected. So maybe you become anxious, or you become overwhelmed, or you start feeling depressed. The third feedback mechanism is your sociology. The people around you might say, you're not looking, you're not your normal exuberant self, for example. So your sociology starts giving you feedback. And finally, your ecology, the universe, the world at last. Shit happens, okay? starts giving you feedback. So your signs and symptoms can be indicators of where you are not being congruent with what's important to you. Now, the reason why you're not being congruent is not because you don't want to be. It's because you're terrified that if you're not being congruent with what's important to others, they're going to reject you. And here's the thing. Most of us are walking around in these grown-ass bodies, but we're actually being run by the limiting beliefs and the coping strategies that we formed before we were 3 years old. And that's why behavior can seem so irrational, right? It's because it's not rational. Because little children, younger than a year, are not cognitively rational beings. They're feeling beings. Okay, so what has this got to do with your signs and symptoms being genius? Well, signs and symptoms in your body, they're this feedback, right? That you're not being congruent with who you are. Or they arise so that they're an unconscious agenda to get some need met that you don't feel you can get met any other way. In other words, it's a way for you to get a need met without disapproval, without being rejected, or by minimizing the risk of rejection or conflict. Okay, I'm going to explain to you now how that works. Or it's an attempt to keep you safe. It's an attempt to stop you from getting out of the safety of your ego cage, basically. Okay, so let me illustrate this with an example. So I have this beautiful client that I worked with probably about 18 months ago, and she joined my whole body reset program. And she was actually doing it to support a family member who really wanted to join the program. And she's quite health conscious, and she's got a high value on health. And, you know, she's a perfect normal body weight, and her cholesterol is normal, and all her blood parameters are normal. And she's probably in her late 40s. She may be around 50, actually, maybe slightly younger than that. Okay. And so this healthy, vital human being exercises, eats the right things, sleeps, blah, blah, has a happy life, has a good family, right? Okay, has things that inspire her in the world, right? So she's sorted. And I had a consultation with her a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me that when she was very young, I don't know, child, I can't remember how old, she was diagnosed with having a dicky heart valve. But they said that it wasn't bad enough that it needed surgery, and that they would just need to keep an eye on it, and they'd need to see how it goes, and that at some point she may need to have her heart valve replaced. So she was absolutely fine, had no issues with this until about, I don't know, can't remember now, but let's just say 3 or 4 months ago. So you know how it is. Symptoms start really slowly and you don't notice them, you know. So maybe she was getting a little bit more out of breath, or she might have been a little bit more tired than usual, but she didn't really notice it, didn't think anything of it, sort of moved on, and eventually realized that things weren't that great. So she went and she had a regular checkup every year. She went for her regular checkup, and they said to her, sorry, but this valve is now kaput and it's got to be replaced. So we had a session about that, and then she said to me she'd like to have another session. So the surgery actually is happening this week. So she says to me, now I know this lady, and we've uncovered her limiting beliefs, and I know what her coping mechanism. Her coping mechanism is to make everything beautiful for everyone, to smooth it over. So she is the buffer between her husband, who has a very high-powered, stressful job, and her 3 children who are young adults, and, you know, one is an older teen and the other 2 are young adults, and they're busy finding their feet in the world. And so she's the buffer between them. You know, she's the mom. She runs the interference. She's the buffer between the children. Her job in her reality is to make sure that they are all okay. And her strategy has been that their happiness is more important than her happiness, and that it's her responsibility to keep them happy. Now, none of this is conscious, right? I mean, there's no way that she could just sit down and go, oh yes, well, this is what I believe my purpose in my life is. Not at all. And this comes from a belief that she has from when she's really tiny of not being good enough. And I think she had, her mom was extremely anxious, and she was the only child. And so she learned from an early age that when she makes things nice for her mom, then things are more peaceful in her home. So she is there to regulate her mom's anxiety or her mom's unhappiness. And she's taken this role, this coping strategy, into her own family. So here's the interesting thing. So now she's got this now she knew all this, so she's got this heart valve that's not working, and so she's got to be careful. You know, she gets out of breath or she gets palpitations now. She's aware of her heart, and obviously her focus is on this now. And she said to me, you know, it's the weirdest thing when her husband is very stressed at work, or, you know, he's short-tempered, or his fuse is short, and if he loses his temper, even if he's not losing his temper at her, then she starts getting palpitations. When one of her children is lamenting because her career is not the way where she wants it to be and she's not happy and she feels like a failure, she gets the palpitations. When her youngest child is concerned about not maybe fitting in at school or whatever problem he may have, she feels her heart starts going crazy. If one of her children go out and party too late at night and she's worried about it, then her heart goes nuts. So I said to her, "You're a genius." And she said, "Well, how can I be a genius? My heart valve was fine and now my heart valve doesn't work." And I said, "Well, because check what happens. Your heart is currently showing you how much responsibility you are taking for the happiness of everyone else in your life. And the reason why you are doing that, one of the reasons, is because you are seeing them as powerless, and that if you don't rescue them, then they won't be okay. And that is not congruent with freedom. That's not congruent with like being who you really want to be, because you want to live for you. You don't want to live for them. So is it any surprise that your heart valve is given out now? And now that it's given out, check what it's telling you. Physically in your body, you are experiencing how you respond to what you perceive as being the unhappiness of your family. And you can see how you've taken on the responsibility, because she sees how she pleased her mom when she was a child, but she didn't see how she does it with her family. And so there's two issues here. One is it's not your responsibility to make anyone else happy. And this is hard when it's your children. I get that. Okay. And the second one is that you want the freedom to be who you are. When you serve yourself from your heart, when you live congruently with who you really are, with your real truth, you give everyone else permission to do the same. It's actually not selfish. It's the most beautiful act of selfless love that you can do. And she's like, "I never saw it that way before." Because her whole thing was, why has this happened? Why has this happened now? Why have I got this, right? And because she tries to smooth things over for everyone, she has downplayed how anxious this has made her. Because she can't be unhappy. Check how she can't be. She can't be unhappy. She can't be anxious and overwhelmed, because her job is to make sure that no one else gets anxious and overwhelmed, even though she's the one who's got to go and have the surgery. This is what I mean by genius. Unconsciously, between her and the creator, because I do believe that it's a co-creation, created this condition in her body that she could have a physical experience of what her coping strategy is and how it shows up in the world and how it doesn't serve her. Because the heart is the organ energetically that's associated with our radiant joy. And our radiant joy is when we're living congruently with who we are. And so her heart is broken. Not by her family. They're not breaking her heart. She taking responsibility for their happiness means that she feels she has to sacrifice her own happiness in order to make sure everyone else is okay. And that is literally breaking her heart. I hope that makes sense. Please tell me if it does, because it makes perfect sense to me, but it might not make perfect sense to you. And then I had another gift. I have another beautiful client. I have lots of beautiful clients. I love my clients. They're just so amazing. So we were chatting about this morning. So this particular client of mine also has a health condition that is improving, and we were talking about how this works and agendas, and I was explaining this concept to her, and she was like, "Oh, you're right. I am a genius." So her story is that also it's very selfless and needs to be everything for everyone, and had an elderly aunt that didn't have any sort of anyone that could help her, look after her. And I think it was a stepmother, actually, or maybe her mother, I can't remember. Two old ladies that needed someone to do the run around and caring for them. And she was doing this for them. So she was shuttling between these two. And she wasn't resentful about it. She was doing this because her perception, this is how I heard the story, is there wasn't anyone else to do it. And she loved both these women, and so she was doing it. But in the process, she was sacrificing who she really is. And what she didn't realize was this was part of her coping strategy of being the good girl. So her coping strategy is, I always have to be the good girl. And this is what a good girl would do. A good girl wouldn't hire a carer to do this. A good girl would do this herself. So what happened? She broke her arm. She couldn't drive and she couldn't care for them. And so she got the rest and the downtime and the me time that she didn't believe she could have without being rejected by these two women. And even though these two women may have been pissed that she broke her arm, well, I mean, what are they going to do about that? You know, that she broke her arm, right? So it's not that she was just lazy. It wasn't that she was mean. It wasn't that she was a bad family member. It wasn't that she was a bad girl. It was, oh my goodness, she was a girl who had an accident, who broke her arm. She had another example that just popped into her head as we were talking, and she said she tore the ligaments in her foot once, and it also stopped her from having to do this sort of maniacal caring for others. So this is the genius of your signs and symptoms. So yes, your signs and symptoms have got downsides. They cause anxiety. You know, they can cause you pain. They can be very restrictive. Does my client love the idea that she's got to go and have her heart valve replaced? No, she doesn't love the idea she's got to go for surgery. But you know what? Is this valuable for her? Is she ever going to forget this? Never, because she experienced it somatically. My client who sees the genius in her broken arm, it's allowing her to see the genius in her current strategy that she's applying. So this is not manipulative, guys, because it's not conscious. If it was conscious, we could get what we wanted without having to be sick. So what it does is it allows us to meet our own needs very often on some level without being ostracized or condemned by someone else. So the trick in healing is to find out what is your underlying agenda. What is it that's driving you? Okay. And there are ways of doing that. I mean, I can obviously help you do that. That's what I do. And then recognizing it and then asking yourself, how can I get that need met without having to be sick? Because that's ultimately the question. Because if you want to truly heal, you have to remove the need for the unconscious agenda or the strategy, which means you have to find a different way of doing it. And that's what allows you to step into your power like the CEO that you are of your life, and finding a way that is more aligned with who you are, that isn't making any excuses for you, and that allows you to get what you want and what you would love and what you need without fearing the conflict or the ostracism or the condemnation or the idea that you're bad. So there is genius in your signs and symptoms, my friend. You are a creative genius. And together with the creative genius that created this entire universe and that's built these feedback mechanisms in, you need not be a victim of your overwhelm, of your anxiety, of your signs and symptoms. And here's the thing, some of the signs and symptoms, you know, sometimes it's difficult for you to actually shift the signs and symptoms. I'm not saying, you know, that everyone who does this is going to be miraculously cured. A lot of people do actually, but it's about seeing the genius at work. It's about recognizing that this is part of your genius. This is not a punishment. This is not because you're a moron. This is not because you're bad. This is not because you don't deserve to get what you want. And the converse of that is you don't have to become good in order to be healed. You don't have to become good. What you want to do is you want to recognize that this is just a strategy. As soon as you recognize this is a strategy, it takes some of the sting out of it. This is a strategy. And you know, what could an alternative strategy be? And your alternative strategy is going to serve you best when it comes from what your soul is longing to express. And you can connect to that through your intuition. And there's a structured way that you can do it. This is what I teach my clients. This is what I teach in my group programs. This is what I am going to be teaching in the training, which is called the Healer Is You training. That's happening at the end of the month. This was last month's Your Best Life training. I've just changed the name, okay? And the reason why I've changed the name is because, remember, we're going full on for healing now, right? We're not pussyfooting around anymore. So that 3-evening training is going to give you all the insights and the tools and techniques to help you uncover what is your agenda, what is your coping strategy. Can you connect deeply with your innate intelligence and find out what is the message that these signs and symptoms are trying to give you? What I used to say to my patients in practice, especially my patients who I knew were Christians or, you know, were religious, had some sort of spiritual belief where they prayed, was, you know, if it's a feedback mechanism, if your disease label is a feedback mechanism, then praying for God to remove it is a bit of a way, well, I don't know that it's a prayer that's going to be answered that well, because There's a reason why it's there. It's a message, right? It's sending you a message. It's sending you a message to help you step into your power. So when you can't just say, well, take the messenger away. So imagine, right? You're a besieged city in medieval Europe, and you're the baron of the keep or whatever it is. You're the king of the castle, right? And a messenger comes to tell you there's an army coming and they are destroying everything in their wake, and you need to fortify and you need to stock up on food and drop the portcullis and get the women and children to safety. And you go, kill the messenger. Don't want to hear the message. Well, the army's going to come and you're going to be pretty much screwed, right? So what is the message? When you pray to have the message revealed, now that's a prayer I think can be answered, right? Because as soon as you get the message, then you can start stepping into your power and ask yourself, okay, what am I really frightened of? Who is going to reject me? Will I die if they reject me now? No, because I'm a grown-ass human who can look after him or herself, potentially, all right? And so that's the starting point. That's where we can start unraveling the yarn so that we can actually get all the knots and tangles out, and so that we can create a beautiful garment out of it. And that beautiful garment is your beautiful, vibrant, vital health. So I would urge you, please, to join the Healer Is You training, which is happening. I know I said 22nd, 23rd, 24th of August. Those of you who have already registered, I'm going to message you personally. Story, my clinic was supposed to open next week. It's too early. It's got to be the following week. It's going to be too much for me to do the training and the clinic. So the training is going into the last week of August. I think it's the 29th, 30th, and 31st. I will confirm that. That training, there's no obligation to join anything else after that. It is the foundational training for the Whole Body Reset program, which is going to kick off in September, as well as for a 6-month ongoing program. It's a hybrid between group coaching and individual coaching called The Healer Is You, which also kicks off in September. So that training that is happening at the end of the month is 1,850 Rand, or pay what you can afford. I want this to be available to as many people as possible. So those of you who can afford it, I would urge you please to pay for it, because I am running a business here. But those of you who can't afford it, please pay what you can afford. I'd be very grateful. And you will have the tools and techniques to start living a spirit-aligned life and stepping out of the fear of your egoic reality and understanding what the meaning is in your signs and symptoms. Thank you so much for watching more Shit Loretta Knows. I am very grateful to you. If you are watching this live, please type live. I see some people have commented. Thank you for your comments. If you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. You can send me a direct message, whatever, you know how to get hold of me. You can leave a comment and ask me to contact you, and I will do so. Please join me next week again for more Shit Loretta Knows. I have no idea what the topic will be, but it'll be something similar. And in the meantime, I hope you guys have a cracking week. I will put the registration link for the Healer Is You training in the comments as soon as this replay of this clip goes up. And if you're interested, go and have a squiz at the page, and I would love to have you there. The last cohort that went through gave amazing feedback and really found it very useful for them. So I'm sending you all lots of love. Thank you very much. Have a lovely Tuesday and the rest of the week, and I will speak to you. Well, I'll navigate your day for you again tomorrow, usual time. I will do it tomorrow. I know it's a holiday tomorrow, and I'll see you for more Shit Loretta Knows next Tuesday. Mwah.